She spent 3 years teaching herself how to let him go. The night she finally walked away, fate gave them one last chance. But neither of them knew it would begin with a single decision that would change both of their lives forever. Before we continue, here's a small request. If you're enjoying this story, please like, follow, and subscribe to stay connected and never miss a new story. The distance between heartbeats. Nathan Cole had built his life on discipline. Every morning began before sunrise. Every meeting started exactly on time. Every decision was made with careful logic instead of emotion. He believed that success belonged to people who stayed in control, and for 12 years that belief had carried him from an ambitious college graduate to the founder of one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in Chicago. His employees admired him, clients trusted him, and competitors respected him. From the outside, his life looked complete. Inside, however, there was a quiet emptiness he never allowed himself to examine. He filled every silence with work because silence had a way of asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. Then Evelyn Brooks walked into his office. She wasn't loud or dramatic. She didn't try to impress anyone. She simply introduced herself, thanked him for the opportunity, and quietly began doing her job better than anyone else ever had. Over the next 3 years, she became the person who remembered everything he forgot, solved problems before they reached his desk, anticipated his needs without being asked, and somehow brought calm into the chaos that surrounded his business. Nathan never questioned why the office felt lighter when she arrived each morning. He only knew that when she took a vacation, the building seemed strangely empty. Evelyn noticed things no one else ever did. She knew he preferred black coffee with a touch of maple syrup instead of sugar, even though he had never mentioned it aloud. She learned that he always loosened his tie after difficult meetings, but tightened it again before stepping outside his office. She remembered the anniversary of the company because she had watched him quietly celebrate it alone during her first year. Without telling him, she started placing a handwritten note of encouragement on his desk every anniversary morning. Nathan never asked who left the notes. He simply folded them carefully and placed them inside the top drawer of his desk. She loved him long before she admitted it to herself. At first, she believed it was admiration, then friendship. Later, she convinced herself it was simply gratitude for working beside a good man. But love has a way of growing in silence. It settled into her heart one ordinary day after another until it became impossible to separate her own future from the sound of his voice calling her name. She never intended to fall in love with her employer. She never intended to spend evenings inventing reasons to stay 10 minutes longer just because his office light was still on. She never intended to memorize the tiny crease that appeared beside his eyes whenever he laughed sincerely. Most of all, she never intended to build a future around someone who had never given her any reason to believe he wanted the same thing. So she made a decision. She would leave, not because she stopped loving him, but because she loved him enough to understand that some feelings become too heavy to carry in secret. Every smile began to hurt. Every ordinary conversation became another reminder that she was standing only a few feet away from the one person she could never honestly speak to. Remaining there meant slowly breaking herself apart. Nathan noticed the change before he understood it. She smiled just as often, completed every assignment perfectly, and spoke with the same calm professionalism she always had. Yet something had shifted. The warmth in her eyes carried a quiet sadness now, as though she were already saying goodbye without using the words. Late one Thursday evening, long after everyone else had gone home, Evelyn walked into his office holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "You should probably stop working," she said softly. "The reports will still be here tomorrow." Nathan looked up from his laptop and laughed quietly. "You always know exactly when I've reached my limit. I've had practice." He accepted the mug and took a sip. The familiar taste surprised him. "You remembered the maple syrup. You always seem calmer when it's there." He stared at her for a second longer than usual. "When did you learn that?" "A long time ago." Neither of them said anything after that. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows while rain tapped gently against the glass. For the first time in years, they spoke without discussing deadlines or clients. Nathan admitted he sometimes wondered whether success had quietly stolen the rest of his life. Evelyn listened without interrupting, allowing him to speak more honestly than he ever had with anyone else. When the conversation ended, she stood slowly. "I need to tell you something tomorrow." His expression grew serious. "Should I be worried?" "I don't know," she answered truthfully. Maybe. She walked out before she lost the courage to leave. Nathan watched the elevator doors close behind her reflection and felt an unfamiliar uneasiness settle into his chest. He couldn't explain it, but somehow tomorrow suddenly felt far more important than any business meeting waiting on his calendar. Nathan stood outside Evelyn's office the next morning with his hand resting against the half-open door, unsure why he felt so uneasy. He had replayed their conversation from the night before more times than he cared to admit. Something in her voice had stayed with him long after he arrived home, making sleep impossible. For the first time in years, he found himself arriving at work early not because of a meeting or an urgent deadline, but because he wanted to speak with one person before the day carried them in different directions. Evelyn was already there, organizing files into neat stacks as sunlight spilled across her desk. She looked exactly as she always did, calm, composed, focused, but there was a quiet sadness behind her smile that he could no longer ignore. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning." Nathan stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "You said you needed to tell me something." She nodded once, reached into her folder, and placed a sealed envelope on the desk between them. "This is my resignation." The words settled over the room with astonishing weight. Nathan stared at the envelope without touching it. "You're leaving?" "In 4 weeks." "Why?" She had prepared countless answers during the previous month, but none of them seemed honest enough. "I've been offered another position in Seattle. It's a chance to grow professionally, and I think it's time for a new beginning." Nathan searched her face, hoping to find some sign that this was temporary, that she was only frustrated after a difficult project, that he could fix whatever had gone wrong. Instead, he saw quiet certainty. "Were you unhappy here?" he asked. "No." "Did I do something?" She shook her head immediately. "You've always treated me with respect." "Then why leave?" Evelyn lowered her eyes for a moment before meeting his gaze again. "Because sometimes staying somewhere you love isn't the same as growing there." Nathan wanted to ask what she truly meant, but something told him she would not answer. He picked up the envelope, turning it over slowly in his hands as though delaying the moment might somehow change its contents. "I don't want to lose you." The confession surprised both of them. Evelyn's heart tightened. She had imagined hearing those words countless times, yet now they carried an entirely different meaning. She knew he was talking about work, about the company, about the person who kept everything running smoothly. She forced herself to smile. "You'll be fine. It won't feel the same." Silence stretched between them until the ringing of a distant phone broke it apart. Nathan carefully set the envelope on his desk. "Would you at least let me think about this before I accept it?" "Of course. Thank you." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her once more. "Evelyn." She looked back. "I'm going to miss seeing you every morning." For one dangerous second, she nearly told him everything. She nearly admitted that every ordinary morning beside him had quietly become the happiest part of her life. Instead, she simply nodded and walked away before the tears gathering in her eyes betrayed her. The weeks that followed passed with painful normalcy. Meetings continued. Clients called. Contracts were signed. Nothing about the company changed, yet everything felt different. Nathan noticed himself inventing excuses to stop by Evelyn's office several times each day. Sometimes he asked about reports he already understood. Sometimes he requested updates he could have read himself. Other times he simply stood in the doorway making conversation that had nothing to do with business. He didn't understand why he kept doing it. He only knew the thought of her leaving made every conversation feel strangely important. Evelyn noticed it too. She treasured every unnecessary question, every extra minute, every small smile he offered without realizing it might be the last one they shared. She answered each conversation with the same professionalism she had always shown, determined not to make her departure harder than it already was. On her final Friday afternoon, the office grew unusually quiet. Most employees had already left for the weekend, leaving only the soft hum of lights and the distant sound of rain beginning outside. Evelyn packed the last of her belongings into a single cardboard box. There wasn't much to take. A framed photograph of the Chicago skyline, a favorite notebook, a ceramic coffee mug with a tiny crack near the handle. She paused before removing the small desk calendar that had marked 3 years of ordinary days she secretly wished had never ended. Nathan appeared at her doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee. "One last break?" he asked with a faint smile. She accepted the cup. "I was wondering if you'd remember." "I almost didn't." He looked around her nearly empty office. It's strange. What is? I thought I'd have 4 weeks to get used to this. He laughed quietly, though there was no humor in it. Turns out 4 weeks isn't nearly enough. Evelyn looked down into her coffee. Sometimes no amount of time is. Rain tapped gently against the windows as they stood together in silence. Finally, Nathan spoke again. Would you let me drive you home? She hesitated. You don't have to. I know. He smiled. I'd like to. She agreed with a quiet nod. When they reached the parking garage, the rain had become a steady curtain of silver. Nathan opened the passenger door for her before walking around to the driver's side. As the car pulled into the evening traffic, neither of them spoke. The city lights reflected across the wet streets while soft music played almost unnoticed through the speakers. Halfway to her apartment, Nathan finally broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think people always recognize the most important moments while they're living them? Evelyn turned toward the rain-streaked window before answering. No. I think most people only understand those moments after they've already become memories. Nathan tightened his hands around the steering wheel. I hope this isn't one of those moments. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, wishing with all her heart that she had the courage to tell him the truth before it became too late. Nathan slowed the car as they reached Evelyn's apartment building, but neither of them made any move to end the evening. The windshield wipers swept steadily across the glass while the rain continued to fall, wrapping the city in a quiet haze. The engine idled softly between them. We're here, Nathan said at last, though he sounded almost disappointed by the fact. Evelyn rested her hand on the door handle without opening it. Thank you for the ride. You're welcome. Another silence followed. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence shared by two people who both sensed that something important remained unsaid. Nathan looked toward the apartment entrance, then back at her. Can I ask you one more question? She nodded. When you accepted the new job, were you excited? Evelyn smiled faintly. I tried to be. That's not what I asked. She lowered her eyes. No. Nathan frowned. Then why accept it? She searched for an answer that wouldn't reveal too much. Because sometimes the hardest decision is also the healthiest one. Healthiest for who? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the door handle again. Before she could step out, Nathan spoke quietly. I'm going to miss talking to you. His words stopped her completely. You have plenty of people to talk to. Not like you. He laughed softly, almost embarrassed by his own honesty. Everyone else talks to the CEO. You always talk to me. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She wanted to tell him that she had always seen the man before the title, that behind every confident decision was someone who carried more loneliness than anyone realized. But if she started talking, she feared she would never stop. She stepped out into the rain. Nathan watched her walk toward the entrance, carrying the small cardboard box that held 3 years of memories. Just before disappearing inside, she turned around. Their eyes met through the rain-covered windshield. She smiled one last time and disappeared into the building. Nathan remained parked at the curb long after she was gone. For reasons he couldn't explain, driving away felt impossible. It was as though leaving meant accepting that a chapter of his life had truly ended. Eventually, he started the car and headed home, but the apartment that had once felt comfortably quiet now seemed strangely empty. The following Monday was the first workday without Evelyn. Nathan arrived early out of habit, expecting to see the light on in her office. It was dark. Her desk sat perfectly clean, waiting for someone else. The sight unsettled him far more than he expected. Throughout the morning, he reached for the phone several times to ask her a question before remembering she was no longer there. He walked toward her office twice before catching himself halfway down the hallway. Meetings dragged on. Reports felt heavier. Even simple decisions took longer than usual because he kept expecting someone to quietly appear beside him with the answer already prepared. By late afternoon, he admitted something to himself that he had spent weeks avoiding. He didn't simply miss an exceptional employee. He missed Evelyn. He missed the calm she carried into every room. He missed hearing her laugh outside his office after solving another impossible problem. He missed the way she always noticed when he skipped lunch and somehow found a reason to interrupt his schedule long enough for him to eat. The realization arrived slowly, then all at once. It wasn't the company that felt incomplete. It was his life. Across the country, Evelyn stood in her new office overlooking Seattle's waterfront. The position was everything she had expected. Better salary, greater responsibility, new opportunities. Her coworkers welcomed her warmly, and the work challenged her in exciting ways. Everything she had planned for was finally happening. Yet every evening, when she returned to her apartment, the silence followed her inside. She caught herself checking the time, knowing that back in Chicago Nathan would probably be finishing his last meeting of the day. More than once she reached for her phone before reminding herself that she no longer had any reason to call him. Days turned into weeks. Neither of them forgot the other. Nathan buried himself in work, hoping exhaustion would quiet the ache that had settled somewhere deep inside him. Evelyn threw herself into her new career with equal determination, believing that distance would eventually teach her heart to move on. Instead, every success felt strangely incomplete because the one person she wanted to tell about it was the one person she believed she could never call again. One rainy evening, nearly 2 months after she had left Chicago, Nathan opened the top drawer of his desk searching for an old contract. Instead, his hand found a small stack of folded notes tied together with a blue ribbon. Curious, he unfolded the first one. "Happy company anniversary. I hope today reminds you how many lives your work has changed." There was no signature, but he recognized the handwriting instantly. "Evelyn." He unfolded another note. Then another. Every anniversary message she had quietly left over the years had been carefully saved without him even realizing why he had kept them. Nathan smiled sadly as he read each one. Only then did he understand that somewhere along the way, those small pieces of paper had become far more valuable than any business award hanging on his office wall. He looked out at the Chicago skyline glowing beyond the windows and whispered into the empty office, "I should have understood sooner." Nathan read the last handwritten note one more time before carefully folding it back into place. He remained alone in his office long after the city lights had come alive outside the windows. For years he had believed that success was measured by growth charts, contracts, and quarterly reports. Yet the quietest things in his life had proven to be the most valuable. A cup of coffee prepared exactly the way he liked it, a handwritten note left without expecting recognition, a conversation at the end of a difficult day, and a woman who had quietly stood beside him without ever asking for anything in return. The next morning, instead of opening his laptop, Nathan booked a flight to Seattle. He wasn't traveling to convince Evelyn to return to Chicago or to ask her to give up the career she had worked so hard to build. He simply wanted to tell her the truth while there was still time. If she chose a future without him, he would respect it. But he refused to spend another year wondering what might have happened if he had only found the courage to speak. Hours later, he stood outside the modern office building where Evelyn now worked. He waited patiently until the workday ended. When the glass doors opened and she stepped outside, she froze in surprise. "Nathan?" she whispered. He smiled, though his hands betrayed his nervousness. "Hi, Evelyn." For a moment, neither of them moved. Months of distance disappeared into a silence filled with everything they had never said. Finally, Evelyn walked toward him. "What are you doing here?" "Finishing a conversation I should have started a long time ago." She looked at him carefully. "You flew across the country for a conversation?" He laughed softly. "For the most important one of my life." They crossed the street to a quiet waterfront park overlooking Elliott Bay. The evening sun painted the water with shades of gold, while sailboats drifted peacefully across the harbor. Nathan took a slow breath. "When you left Chicago, I told myself I only missed my best employee." That explanation lasted about 2 days. Evelyn lowered her eyes, afraid to hope. "Then I realized I wasn't missing the work you did. I was missing the person you are. Every achievement felt incomplete because you weren't there to share it with. Every success reminded me of someone I wanted beside me." He paused before continuing. "I don't want to ask you to leave the life you've built here. I don't want you to sacrifice your dreams for me. I love you too much to ask that." Evelyn looked up, her eyes shining. Nathan smiled. "Instead, I'd like to ask a different question." He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded one of the anniversary notes she had written years earlier. "Would you let us build a new dream together? One where neither of us has to give up who we are." Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks before she even realized she was crying. "I spent so long convincing myself that loving you meant letting you go." Nathan gently took her hands in his. "Maybe real love isn't about letting go. Maybe it's about choosing each other honestly, even when it's difficult." She laughed through her tears. "You finally stopped speaking like a CEO. I had a very good teacher." Evelyn stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. He held her just as tightly, not out of fear that she would disappear again, but out of gratitude that life had given them another chance to choose each other with open eyes. Over the following months, they built their future slowly and deliberately. Nathan expanded his company with a permanent Seattle office and divided his time between both cities. Evelyn accepted a leadership role that allowed her talents to flourish without standing in anyone's shadow. Their relationship was never built on dramatic promises or impossible perfection. It was built on honesty, respect, patience, and the quiet decision they made every day to keep choosing one another. Years later, when people asked how they had met, they always smiled before answering. They rarely mentioned the promotions, the long workdays, or the difficult choices. Instead, they spoke about small moments: a cup of coffee shared on a rainy evening, a handwritten note tucked into a desk drawer, and the courage to finally speak the truth before it became another lifelong regret. They discovered that the shortest distance between two hearts had never been measured in miles. It had always been measured in honesty. Love is strongest when it is built on honesty, mutual respect, and the courage to express what is in your heart before fear or pride steals the opportunity. Success may build a career, but genuine connection is what gives life its deepest meaning. Every journey eventually reaches a moment when two paths become one. Nathan and Evelyn chose that path together, not because life became easy, but because they finally understood that the greatest decisions are made with both wisdom and heart. As they walked toward an unknown future hand in hand, they carried with them not the weight of missed chances, but the quiet confidence that they would face every tomorrow together. And sometimes, that is the happiest ending any story could ever hope to find. This is the end of the story,